This big unit is Samarkanda from Xaoc Devices. It's a quad digital delay and looper which can do a lot of things. For example, you can use it as the ultimate multi-tap dub techno echo machine. You can modulate the delay times with analog-style pitch changes for intricate musical delay patterns. You can capture, loop, layer and manipulate audio for creative ambient soundscapes. You can dial in ultra-short delays and use it as a tuned resonator with voltproductive pitch control, turning it into a complete synth voice. And you can create complex feedback networks for otherworldly pseudo-reverb effects. Samarkanda clocks in at 42 HP, which is undeniably pretty chunky, but it certainly pulls its weight. It has a properly modular, patch programmable design with 4 identical channels that can be linked and combined in all sorts of interesting ways. The delay times range from half a millisecond up to 15 seconds, so it'll do everything from chorus and flanger effects through to long echo and looping effects. You could configure it as 4 independent simple delays, 2 stereo delays, a single 4-tap delay, a pair of loopers each with a dedicated delay effect, a combo of tuned resonator, flanger and stereo ping-pong delay. You get the idea. This video is sponsored by Xaoc Devices, and in it I'll build a few patches that demonstrate the range of things Samarkanda can do. If you enjoy these demos and want to see more modular content, then please leave a like and a comment and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll start with an overview of the controls, but do feel free to skip ahead to the patches if you just want to hear it in action. So Samarkanda has 4 identical channels. Each one has an input at the top left and 2 outputs at the top right. There's a dedicated wet out and a mix out, which is a blend of the dry and affected signal. That mix is controlled by this knob and CV input. The mix out is also internally normal to the input of the next channel. This means you can cascade the channels with each one delaying the already delayed signal, which can lead to some very complex patterns of echoes. The wet out is internally normal to the feedback input, with the amount of feedback controlled by this knob and CV input. There's no signal processing in the internal feedback path, but you can patch things like filters between the wet out and the feedback in, and you can cross-patch feedback paths between channels for effects like ping-pong delays. There are dedicated buttons and trigger inputs for reverse, which is a reverse delay effect achieved by playing the buffer backwards, and hold, which freezes and loops the contents of the buffer, ignoring the input signal. The delay time is set by the large time knob at the bottom. When the tempo light is flashing green, it's in continuous mode, and there's a switch to select one of 3 ranges for the time knob. In the ×1 range, it spans from half a millisecond up to 150 milliseconds, and the ×10 and ×100 positions let you dial in times up to 15 seconds. You can also hit the tap tempo button to manually set a delay time. The colour will change to yellow to show it's in tap tempo mode. Or you can connect an external clock to the sync input at the top, in which case the light will turn red. If the channel is synced or using tap tempo, the big knob then sets the delay time to integer divisions or multiplications of that clock, and the range switch has no effect. The CV input for time at the top is calibrated for a volt per octave response, but by default higher voltage here results in longer times, so if you're using it as a looper or resonator, you can invert this response to play with a keyboard or sequencer by holding the purge button and pressing the hold button. You can also hold purge and press reverse to invert the audio in the feedback path. The purge button on its own simply clears the audio buffer, which can be handy if you've built up a wall of wild feedback and want to quickly get back to normal. Each channel has a behavior switch, which sets whether that channel uses an analog or digital style of response to delay time changes. The manual goes into the differences in detail, but in a nutshell, the analog behavior results in pitch changes similar to a tape or BBD delay, while the digital behavior is a granular-like effect that doesn't affect the pitch. These also have very different effects when the buffer is looping, which you'll hear in one of the patches. The final thing to mention is the channel linking. The link buttons between the channels let you create groups where the leftmost channel controls those linked to it. When a channel is linked, its time control adjusts its delay time relative to the master channel. The feedback and mix controls are also relative. At 12 o'clock, they will follow any changes made in the master channel. Again, the manual goes into a lot more detail on this, and it's well worth a read. So that's all the theory. Let's start patching. So let's get started with this patch, which is a kind of 4-tap dub techno delay extravaganza. And I must admit, I've been jamming with this for the last hour or so, and I've had to force myself to break off and record some because it's so much fun. The basic idea is I've got a chord stab from Odessa through Lublin coming into Praga, which is going to be triggered once every 2 bars, and that sounds like this. I've got some random modulation on the spectral tilt of Odessa so that each hit is a slightly different timbre, just for a bit of variety. Got a nice short plucky pinged envelope on Lublin. So again, this nice kind of classic dubby stab. There's no delay happening yet. I'm running that into Praga, and I'm going to use the aux send and return loop to go into Samarkanda. So the aux send is going into the input on channel 1. I've linked all 4 channels. And there's a couple of different ways you could patch this. One is to mult that send into all 4 inputs, but if I just set the wet-dry control to fully dry, it will cascade down and mult that input to all 4 inputs. So each channel will get its own copy of that dry effect send, and it will then delay it by its own timing, and I can take those wet outputs of each channel. I'm mixing them through the nearness panning mixer. It's like a fixed panning mix which gives us a stereo return back in, but I've panned those 4 taps across the stereo field. So if I turn up the aux send, so with no feedback at all, these are the times I've set basically. We get this little pattern. I've got 1/8 notes on the first channel. I've got a 3/2 division of that on the second channel. I've got a faster, twice as fast on channel C, and slow I've got like a divide by 3 on channel D. The feedback paths I've kind of broken out. The first 2 channels are going to go through, or are going through, Zagreb stereo filter in high pass mode, and the 3rd channel feedback path is going to go through the Belgrade filter, which is a slightly more aggressive filter I've got in the bandpass position. I'm not going to do anything in the feedback path of channel D, but I will reverse the buffer of channel D. And let's bring up some feedback. So with the controls of the linked channels at 12 o'clock, they'll just follow whatever I'm doing on the first channel. And of course I can then finesse them to individually alter them slightly. But let's get a healthy bit of feedback going. And I can play with the amount of feedback on this channel C. Play with the Belgrade. Nice effects by playing with that feedback path. I've got a bit of modulation to the filter cutoff of both the filters. I'm also modulating the spread on Zagreb, which will kind of seesaw the left and right sides. And yeah, let's bring in a sub bass. Really simple kind of saturated sine sub bass from Sophia. You might not even hear that unless you're listening on headphones or good speakers. And let's bring in some drums. So this is in the case off screen. It's the Patching Panda blast and hats and an 808, or sorry, 909 clap. Dead simple. But we can start playing these various delays now. Hit hold on this channel D, so we get this little reverse loop in the background. Take the aux send back out again. You can hear that little reverse pattern going on. In fact, we can hold all the channels. Retune them. yeah, with these independent feedback paths and different filters, different delay times, a bit of freezing, buffers, playing with feedback amounts. It's so much fun, so jammable. So one of the things I really like about the analog behavior setting in Samarkanda is the kind of pitch changes you get when you modulate the delay time. It's quite similar to how it works in Sarajevo, the Xaoc Devices vintage BBD delay, and it's particularly nice when you've got it synced to an external clock, because then the big time knob controls multiplications and divisions of that clock, which means that the pitch jumps are kind of nice, pleasant musical intervals. Let's have a listen. I've got a sequence on Moskwa playing Sophia just off screen through Lublin, really simple 8-step sequence, and at the moment I'm not sending it through Samarkanda. I'm going to do it on a send and return loop again, similar to the previous patch. The sequence sounds like this. Again, I've got a bit of master reverb on, and if I just bring up the effects send, we're just going to listen to channel 1 for the time being. I've disconnected the second channel. So if I now modulate this delay knob, you can hear these little pitch jumps, which sound quite nice. Let's plug in the right side, and I'm going to have a different delay time in the right and left. Let's get a slower sequence. So I've got one of the gate outputs from Moskwa clocking Tirana. If I go into the time CV input, now as it steps through these 4 steps, we're modulating the time, and we get these nice little jumps as it catches up from one to the next. If we now bring in a bit of feedback too, take another one of those gate outputs from Moskwa and just reverse the right side. So that's going to toggle a reverse once per cycle, so every alternate loop will be reversed on the right side. Again, this should sound quite rich in stereo if you're listening in stereo. Let's go up an octave. As I bring the feedback up. Simple sequence is now much more dense. Let's try holding it. I can take out the original. So now we're just listening to that looping buffer with the pitch changes and the reversing happening. I take Sophia back down the octave and bring in the original underneath that. So next I want to explore the looping capabilities of Samarkanda, and to do this I've got a slightly different kind of patch. I was chatting to Ben Divkid about the unit because he's also doing a 3 patches video on it, and he came up with quite a nice idea, which was that we could create some audio and swap it and then each create a patch with the other person's audio. So that's what we've done. He sent me a really nice kind of Rhodes loop with a synth arpeggio, and I've sent him some audio from my Surge system which he'll be using. Let's just bring up the Rhodes part. I'm playing this from a disting, which is off screen. It's just a nice mellow 75 BPM 8-bar loop. Nice chord progression. Coming in to the first channel of Samarkanda for this, and I'm fully wet, and I've got a slow clock going into the sync input. It's 2 beats at 75 BPM, or a bar at 150 BPM, however you want to view it. And I've got this arpeggio part on the next channel. The output of this second channel is cascading through to the next channel on Samarkanda, and we're going to use this as a faster delay. I'm clocking this separately. So I can add some delay to that part. I'm going to keep this dry for the minute. And let's just loop a section. So now, because I'm fully wet, this buffer playback has now taken over from the dry signal entirely. And I'm in digital behavior mode with these two channels linked. And in that mode, when you increase the time, it kind of scans backwards through the buffer and grabs more of that audio. It's always got the last 15 seconds in the buffer. Because my clock that I'm syncing it with is tied to the tempo of the looping audio playing back, all these things are perfectly in time. So I can grab and re-loop sections of this sub-loop. Let's go back up to this kind of... Now the difference if I was to switch, say, the arpeggio part to analog behavior, unlink them. I've got a copy of the same sync signal coming in. With the analog behavior, it takes that initial loop and slows it down or speeds it up, which is quite nice. So I could keep the digital behavior on the first channel, maybe reverse that. Let's add some reverb. Let's add some delay on the synth part again. And there's analog mode if I change the timing of the synth part. You get those nice musical changes again, which we were hearing in the last patch. Freely switch between analog and digital. So I've now pitched the Rhodes part down effectively. Let's bring it back and section to loop. So yeah, thanks very much for this audio, Ben, and do go and check out DivKid's video on Samarkanda too for some more great patch ideas. Okay, next I want to explore using very short delay times and very short impulses at the input to turn Samarkanda into a tuned resonator. I'm going to use the first three channels to produce a kind of three-layered voice, and it really opens up a whole world of synth voice kind of applications for Samarkanda, somewhere between coupless strong synthesis and kind of physical modeling ring style tones. It's really dependent on what kind of impulses you feed it, and Zadar is great for this. Some of these kind of complex envelope shapes in the later banks really produce some interesting kind of tones, quite different from normal kind of coupless strongy kind of sounds. Let's get a little sequence going. So we're just listening to this first channel, And the feedback control in analog mode here controls how long these notes are. I've got volt per octave coming into the time input, and if I hold purge, I've set this time inversion parameter for these channels to be on. That means that this time input will respond volt per octave style rather than higher voltages slowing things down. And yeah, the input is just this output of Zadar here, and these different shapes have a pretty huge impact on the sound and the time of these shapes as well. We get into this quite interesting acoustic kind of strange comb filtery kind of resonances happening. Let's go back to U2, say, for now. But let's modulate that time with a slow LFO from Batumi. So it's almost like a kind of bandpass or a notch filter sweep kind of effect going on here. I've linked the next two channels. Let's bring in the next one. The feedback is kind of linked across these as well, but we can also kind of tune it to bring certain notes out. So this is playing a fifth above. I'm using the kind of multiplication and division relative to that. I could also just go into green mode and tune it. And I've got the third one an octave down. And by inverting the feedback, I've already done it on channel 1. We've got some other kind of octave shifts and slight different tones happening when the feedback path is inverted internally. But let's keep that running. I've also got a fourth channel on this mixer, which is the same note sequence, just playing a really simple sine wave sub bass just to give it a bit of kind of bass heft. And let's bring in a kick drum. A bit of a side chaining effect from this. This is the Patching Panda Blast again. And some hats as well. Got one channel left on Samarkanda, so I've set that up as a conventional delay, clock to the master clock, and just going from the aux end of the mixer, and I'm going to run the feedback through Belgrade. Let's just send the upper two to this voice through that delay. High pass filter from Belgrade and the feedback path. Let's just bring up these really interesting kind of swells of pretty powerful voice and quite different from your usual kind of car plus strong kind of tones. Let's try one of these different wave shapes to finish. So to finish, I just want to explore one of the techniques that's mentioned in the manual, which is to create a feedback delay network, or FDN, to produce a kind of artificial reverb effect. In the manual, they suggest using a 4x4 matrix mixer. I don't have a 4x4 matrix, I've only got a 3x4, so I'm going to do this with 3 channels and 3 inputs and outputs on the matrix to do a sort of 3x3 network. It'll be slightly cruder than a 4x4 one would sound, but I still think it's quite interesting. Now, the basic principle is you mult your audio input source to however many channels you're using, in this case 3. So I've got this input multed here, and then you take the wet outputs into a matrix mixer and then take the 3 outputs of the matrix back into the feedback inputs. And this way, they're all going to kind of contribute to each other's feedback paths. And if you set the delay times to be short and different and up the feedback a bit, you get something that approximates an artificial reverb. Let's listen to a dry sequence. So I'm creating this with Moscow, Berlin and Jena, which are just off screen, going through Lublin. I'm just kind of modulating the wavetable on Jena, so it's kind of evolving slightly, but fairly nice, straightforward, dry sequence. I'm going to take these two as my output pair, so you can take any 2 channels, it doesn't really matter which. Let's turn them up to midway on the wet dry, put them panned hard left and right. At the moment I've got these delay times quite long, but if I start to shorten the delay times, I'm in the ×1 setting, the fastest range. I'm in digital mode at the moment as well. And if I start to bring up these feedbacks, we start to get this strange, ringy, resonant kind of reverb tone, which is very artificial. And the slightest change of feedback or time or knob on the matrix, I've got them all set to around 3 o'clock. Quickly get this kind of runaway squealing feedback, which can be quite a nice effect if it's under control. And because I've got a 4th channel spare, then again I'm going to use this as a straightforward delay, so I'm going to aux send to that just to add an additional sense of space. I'll just flick these reverb channels to the analog behavior, only really makes a difference when we're modulating these times. But this combination of sort of strange, springy feedback reverb with a bit of delay, which is also in analog mode. Interesting sound world for these dry bits of source material. It's really playable with the 4 big knobs like this. So I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully these patches have given you a taste of what Samarkanda is capable of. As is often the case with Xaoc Devices stuff, I feel like I've barely scratched the surface, and I'm pretty sure this thing will be a big part of my patches for quite some time. Thanks again to the Xaoc team for hooking me up and sponsoring the video. Thanks to you for watching, and I'll see you next time.